What if everything we thought we knew about Meghan Markle's rise in the royal family was just the surface? What if someone from inside the inner circle, the very people who have witnessed the family's darkest secrets, finally spoke out? You might think you've read it all, the lavish weddings, the charitable appearances, the palace intrigues. But this story goes far beyond tabloids and public appearances. It's a story of secrets, betrayals, and a revelation so shocking it could reshape how we view Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, and even the royal family itself. And the person pulling back the veil? None other than Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, a woman who has known the inner workings of the monarchy longer than most and isn't afraid to speak truths that others desperately want hidden. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For years, rumors swirled about Meghan Markle before her marriage to Prince Harry. Whispered speculations in tabloids, secretive mentions in social circles, and subtle nods in palace corridors created an air of mystery. Some dismissed them as exaggerations. Others leaned into the gossip for scandalous entertainment. But Sarah Ferguson's recent confirmation has brought those rumors into an entirely new light. According to Ferguson, there was a connection so delicate, so carefully hidden, that no one outside a very select circle knew. And yet, its implications ripple far beyond personal scandal. They touch on family loyalty, public perception, and the very fabric of royal history. Imagine, for a moment, the palace corridors buzzing with hushed conversations, the weight of secrecy pressing down on everyone who dared to know. Can you picture it? That tension, that fear, and that silent acknowledgement of a truth no one dared speak aloud, until now. Sarah Ferguson, or Fergie as she is often affectionately known, has had her own tumultuous journey with the royal family. Once celebrated as the glamorous Duchess of York, she endured public scrutiny, scandal, and moments of deep personal betrayal. And yet, Ferguson has always maintained a unique position within the monarchy. She knows secrets, and she knows people. People trust her, or at least they used to. Her perspective is unmatched. When she speaks, even the most cautious royal insiders pay attention. And now, her words have opened the door to one of the most explosive stories in recent memory. The alleged affair between Prince Andrew and Meghan Markle before her marriage to Prince Harry. Let's pause here and consider the stakes. Why does this matter? Some might argue, it's old news. Why dredge up the past? But think about the ripple effect. If Ferguson's confirmation is accurate, it rewrites the narrative around Meghan Markle. It reframes the relationships within the royal family. It challenges the public image carefully crafted over years. And, perhaps most importantly, it forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, privilege, and secrecy. How does one navigate a world where personal relationships intersect with global scrutiny? Where does loyalty end and personal ambition begin? And most crucially, what happens when the people who hold the secrets finally decide to speak? The story starts long before Meghan became a duchess. Long before the cameras, the red carpets, and the charity galas. Meghan was navigating her own world, one filled with opportunities, ambitions, and connections. She had friends, mentors, and professional acquaintances, but there were also relationships she cultivated in secret. People who mattered, people who influenced her trajectory, and people who would later become central figures in one of the monarchy's most sensational revelations. How she moved within these circles, and how these relationships intersected with the royal family, sets the stage for the story Ferguson has confirmed. Imagine the delicate balancing act, maintaining public composure while engaging in private interactions that could, if exposed, create scandal of unimaginable proportions. Now, let's consider Prince Andrew, a man already no stranger to controversy. From international scrutiny to media scandals, Andrew's reputation has been a topic of constant attention. But what if, beneath the public controversies, there existed a secret, a personal entanglement that no one dared discuss openly? Sarah Ferguson's words suggest exactly that. The implications are staggering. How could such a connection remain hidden? How did those within the palace respond when whispers began to circulate? And, perhaps most intriguingly, what role did Meghan play in all of this? Was she aware of the potential fallout? Did she navigate this with strategic precision, Or was she caught in a situation far beyond her control? These are the questions that will drive this story forward, keeping you, the viewer, on the edge of your seat. The timing of Ferguson's confirmation is itself noteworthy. It comes at a moment when the royal family is under intense scrutiny, and when Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's actions continue to captivate global audiences. Ferguson could have stayed silent. She could have allowed the whispers to die out, as they have so many times before. But she chose to speak. Why? Perhaps it is a matter of personal integrity. Perhaps it is about correcting the narrative, finally providing clarity to a story that has long been clouded in speculation. Or perhaps there are deeper motives at play, a desire to assert influence, to reclaim a voice long overshadowed by palace politics. Whatever the reason, the result is undeniable. The world now knows that a connection existed, and that connection carries consequences no one saw coming. Think about the emotional weight of this revelation. For Meghan, it reframes her public persona. For Harry, it adds another layer of complexity to his already complicated relationship with his family. For Prince Andrew, it challenges the very image he has tried to project for years. And for the public, it forces a reconsideration of everything they thought they knew about the royal family's inner workings. The palace is an environment where appearances matter more than reality. Every smile, every handshake, every public statement is carefully orchestrated. And yet, beneath that polished exterior, the human drama unfolds with intensity, secrecy, and stakes that extend far beyond what the cameras capture. And now we come to the first taste of the deeper revelations. Ferguson's confirmation is not merely about an affair. It is about the chain of events set into motion by that connection. It's about the tensions it created, the alliances it disrupted, and the subtle maneuvers within the palace to contain the fallout. Imagine a web of secrets so intricate that one misstep could bring it all crashing down. Imagine the conversations held in hushed tones, the glances exchanged in hallways, the careful choreography of interactions designed to prevent scandal. And yet, the truth has a way of emerging. It seeps through, layer by layer, until it cannot be ignored. That moment is what Ferguson has captured, and it is what we will explore in depth over the course of this story. So, as we prepare to dive deeper, ask yourself this. How would you navigate a world where your every interaction could be scrutinized, misinterpreted, or weaponized against you? Where personal relationships intersect with public duty in ways that can alter history? Where the truth, when finally revealed, could shock millions and shift the balance of perception in an instant? These are the stakes. These are the tensions. And this is just the beginning. But before we move on to the first chapter, consider this. The palace has seen countless scandals, yet few have carried the potential impact of Ferguson's revelation. The intersection of Meghan Markle, Prince Andrew, and Sarah Ferguson creates a perfect storm, a convergence of personalities, ambitions, and secrets that no one could have anticipated. And while the public may focus on sensational headlines, the real story lies in the subtleties. The whispers in hallways, the private meetings, the hidden motivations that drove decisions and shaped actions. It is in those moments, often unseen and unreported, that the true drama unfolds. Why would Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, choose now to speak out about one of the most explosive secrets in modern royal history? It's a question that immediately grabs attention, and the answer is far more layered than anyone outside the royal circle could imagine. Fergie is not just a figure of tabloid fascination. She is a woman who has lived through the intense scrutiny, betrayal, and power dynamics that define royal life. She knows what it feels like to have your every move dissected by the press, to be judged unfairly, and to navigate relationships where trust is both priceless and fragile. And it is precisely this unique position that gives her insight into Meghan Markle's alleged connection with Prince Andrew, and why her confirmation carries such weight. Let's rewind for a moment. Sarah Ferguson entered the royal family in a whirlwind of glamour, charm, and youthful promise. She married Prince Andrew in 1986, and from that point on, her life became entwined with a world few could imagine: grand palaces, international events, and the constant glare of public and media attention. Yet despite the fairy tale beginnings, Ferguson quickly discovered that royal life was far from idyllic. Scandals, internal rivalries, and media scrutiny became her constant companions. She was forced to learn, sometimes painfully, how the monarchy's invisible rules operated, and how fragile public perception could be. These lessons would later give her an unparalleled understanding of secrecy, manipulation, and the hidden power dynamics that govern the palace. This background is crucial because it explains why Ferguson's voice matters now. Unlike outside commentators, tabloids, or casual royal observers, she has seen the machinery of secrecy from the inside. She knows how whispers spread, how alliances shift, and how truths can be twisted to protect reputations or destroy them. When she speaks, it is not mere speculation. It is informed by decades of lived experience, direct observation, and personal involvement in the family's private world. And now, after years of carefully weighing her words, Ferguson has confirmed a story that had previously been relegated to rumor: the alleged affair between Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew before her marriage to Prince Harry. But what motivated Ferguson to come forward? For years, she has been careful with her public statements, sometimes criticized for not speaking out, sometimes criticized for overexposing personal details. Her timing is strategic, and her motivations are likely complex. Some suggest that Ferguson, having endured her own public scandals, empathizes with the challenges Meghan faced navigating life under the royal microscope. Others argue that she may have personal reasons, loyalties, alliances, or unresolved tensions that prompted her to reveal the truth now. Whatever the case, the revelation has created shockwaves that reverberate far beyond palace walls, and it forces everyone to reevaluate their understanding of the events that shaped Meghan's early royal experience. Ferguson's perspective also offers a unique lens on Meghan herself. Unlike the press, she has had the opportunity to observe Meghan's behavior, her social connections, and the choices she made before entering the royal family. According to Ferguson, Meghan was far from the naive newcomer sometimes portrayed in media narratives. She was savvy, aware of her surroundings, and capable of navigating complex social dynamics with precision. This insight challenges the simplified portrayals of Meghan in popular culture and suggests a more nuanced reality: a woman strategically managing relationships, ambitions, and opportunities within an environment where every move is scrutinized. It's also important to consider Ferguson's personal relationship with Prince Andrew. Even after her divorce, she has maintained a connection with him, navigating a delicate balance of friendship, loyalty, and distance. This unique position gave her access to conversations and observations that others outside the inner circle could never witness. She was able to see patterns, interactions, and behaviors that, in hindsight, point to the alleged connection between Andrew and Meghan. And because she has first-hand experience with the scrutiny that accompanies royal exposure, she understands the implications of revealing this information and the consequences it could have for all parties involved. In recounting her perspective, Ferguson paints a picture of subtlety, discretion, and hidden influence. She speaks not in broad strokes or dramatic exaggeration, but in carefully observed details. Fleeting interactions, meaningful glances, private conversations, and the quiet signals that, in the royal world, speak louder than words. These observations may seem small, but in a world governed by hierarchy, reputation, and perception, they are monumental. They reveal a network of relationships operating behind the public facade, where every gesture, every encounter, and every whispered conversation carries potential consequences. Ferguson's narrative also highlights the intense pressures of navigating these spaces as a woman. Within the royal family, female members often face scrutiny not just for their actions, but for their intentions, appearances, and alliances. Ferguson herself knows this pressure intimately, having endured intense media coverage, public judgment, and internal palace politics. Her insight allows her to contextualize Meghan's alleged connection with Andrew, not as a simplistic scandal, but as part of a broader pattern of strategic navigation within a high-stakes, high-pressure environment. But Ferguson's confirmation is not just about Meghan and Andrew. It is also about transparency, accountability, and the cost of silence. In her words, the palace has long operated on the principle of discretion. Issues are contained, scandals are minimized, and inconvenient truths are suppressed. While this approach may protect the institution, it often comes at the expense of individual agency, truth, and fairness. Ferguson's decision to speak disrupts this pattern. It challenges the culture of secrecy, brings hidden dynamics into the open, and forces a reckoning with the consequences of suppressed truths. As Ferguson recounts her perspective, she also acknowledges the emotional toll of disclosure. Speaking out is not easy. It exposes her to criticism, skepticism, and potential backlash. It forces her to relive moments of tension, observation, and decision-making. And yet, she persists, driven by a combination of moral conviction, personal insight, and a recognition that some truths cannot remain hidden forever. Her courage in stepping forward adds gravity to her confirmation and underscores why the story has captured global attention. What makes Ferguson's perspective especially compelling is her ability to connect the personal with the institutional. She understands both the human relationships involved, the friendships, tensions, and loyalties, and the broader implications for the monarchy. This dual insight allows her to present the alleged connection between Meghan and Andrew not as an isolated incident, but as a piece of a much larger narrative. One involving ambition, strategy, reputation, and the intricate politics of royal life. It is a perspective grounded in experience, informed by observation, and delivered with the credibility of someone who has navigated the very corridors where these secrets unfolded. Ferguson also frames the revelation within a larger pattern of behavior, both by Meghan and by other members of the royal family. She points out that secrecy, strategic alliances, and calculated disclosures are common tools in managing public perception. The alleged connection between Meghan and Andrew fits into this framework, illustrating how personal relationships can intersect with institutional considerations to create moments of intense scrutiny, speculation, and, ultimately, revelation. The emotional stakes in Ferguson's perspective are palpable. She recounts moments of tension, subtle conflicts, and the quiet anxieties that accompany knowledge of sensitive information. Her narrative conveys the weight of responsibility, the fear of misinterpretation, and the challenge of maintaining personal integrity while navigating a world where every word, gesture, and choice is magnified. These elements contribute to a sense of drama, urgency, and suspense that sets the stage for the unfolding story. And yet, Ferguson's perspective is not just about shock value or sensationalism. It is about understanding the human dimensions of royal life, the pressures, compromises, and ethical dilemmas faced by those at the center of power. Through her lens, we gain insight into the complexity of relationships, the delicate balance of loyalty and ambition, and the consequences of actions taken in private that reverberate publicly. It is a nuanced, layered, and deeply human account that adds context, depth, and credibility to the confirmation she has provided. As we close this chapter of perspective, one critical question remains. What motivated Ferguson to reveal this now, after years of silence? Was it empathy for Meghan? A desire to assert her own authority? Or simply the recognition that some truths cannot remain hidden forever? Whatever the reason, the result is undeniable. The world now knows that there was a connection, and that connection carries consequences far beyond what anyone anticipated. Before Meghan Markle became a global figure, a duchess, and a media lightning rod, she lived a life that few outside her inner circles truly understood. Many have assumed that Meghan's path to royalty was sudden, almost magical, a Hollywood actress swept into the gilded halls of the British monarchy. But the reality is far more complex, and understanding it is crucial to grasp the context of the events that Sarah Ferguson would later confirm. This chapter traces Meghan's early navigation of elite social spheres, her encounters with influential figures, and the subtle ways in which she positioned herself within networks that would ultimately intersect with the royal family. Let's start with a question. How does a young woman, born in Los Angeles, end up catching the attention of one of the world's most scrutinized families? Meghan was ambitious, intelligent, and aware of the power of perception. She worked in acting, yes, but she also cultivated relationships in philanthropic, social, and elite circles. She had mentors, friends, and associates who understood not just the world of entertainment, but the world of influence, legacy, and societal standing. Every event she attended, every introduction she accepted, and every carefully curated public appearance contributed to a trajectory that would eventually bring her into proximity with the British royal family. At first glance, Meghan's life in Hollywood appeared ordinary by celebrity standards. She worked diligently on her acting career, building a portfolio that included both minor and prominent roles. But what most people overlooked were the connections she was making behind the scenes. Unlike some actors whose lives are insular and detached from influential networks, Meghan understood the value of relationships. She attended philanthropic events, charity galas, and elite social gatherings where she could meet people who mattered, people whose influence extended beyond Hollywood and into international circles. These networks, largely invisible to the public eye, positioned her in a way that few understood until much later. One of the most critical and least discussed elements of Meghan's early trajectory was her exposure to the social worlds that intersected with the royal family. Elite hotels, private events, and charitable functions provided the backdrop for interactions that would become central to the story, Sarah Ferguson later confirmed. Meghan's charm, intelligence, and social awareness made her memorable in these spaces, and she was able to navigate complex social dynamics with a finesse that many found surprising for someone so young. While the public would later see her as a polished, poised figure entering royal life, the groundwork for this persona was laid long before she ever donned a formal title. It is within this context that her alleged connection with Prince Andrew becomes more understandable, though no less shocking. Meghan did not stumble into royal circles by chance. She moved strategically through spaces where elite figures, including members of the royal family, could observe and interact with her. The subtlety of these interactions, shared dinners, chance meetings at charity events, introductions via mutual acquaintances, created opportunities that few outside insiders could perceive. Sarah Ferguson's later confirmation suggests that these opportunities were not just social niceties, but moments that laid the groundwork for a private connection between Meghan and Andrew. Meghan's understanding of influence extended beyond mere appearances. She was aware of the power of public image and the narratives that could shape perception. Every photograph, interview, or event was carefully managed, intentionally or intuitively, to cultivate an impression of intelligence, charm, and sophistication. This awareness would later play a role in how she navigated the royal world, and it also sheds light on why Ferguson observed her interactions so closely. From Ferguson's perspective, Meghan was not simply a young actress. She was a socially astute individual capable of maneuvering through elite networks with calculated precision. Let's consider another factor: timing. Meghan's entry into these spaces coincided with periods of intense scrutiny and media attention for Prince Andrew. The prince, already under public and media observation, was operating in a world where appearances mattered, but private interactions could remain hidden if conducted carefully. According to Ferguson, the intersection of Meghan's presence and Andrew's private world created conditions ripe for a connection that few others witnessed. The combination of Meghan's awareness, Andrew's position, and the subtle orchestration of social opportunities allowed interactions to occur that would remain largely unseen, yet deeply consequential. Ferguson also points out that Meghan's ability to navigate these spaces required a nuanced understanding of the unspoken rules of elite circles. Unlike Hollywood, where visibility often equates to influence, royal-adjacent spaces operate differently. Hierarchies, protocols, and unspoken codes of behavior govern interactions, and missteps can have severe consequences. Meghan's success in moving through these networks without attracting early controversy demonstrates a level of social intelligence and awareness that Ferguson found noteworthy. It was this combination of skill, timing, and opportunity that created the environment in which the alleged connection with Andrew could occur. Furthermore, Meghan's early relationships in these circles were not limited to casual acquaintance. She cultivated alliances and friendships with individuals who wielded significant social influence, people whose approval and attention could open doors previously inaccessible. These connections extended across charity organizations, social events, and professional networks, and they placed her in proximity to members of the royal family in ways that were both subtle and strategically advantageous. Ferguson observed these dynamics and noted the careful balance Meghan maintained between visibility and discretion, charm and subtlety. It's important to highlight that Meghan's positioning in these spaces was not merely about ambition. She also demonstrated empathy, intelligence, and the capacity to build genuine relationships, which further enhanced her influence. These qualities made her memorable to those she encountered, and they likely contributed to the trust and attention she received from influential figures, including Andrew. Ferguson emphasizes that Meghan's social acumen should not be underestimated. Her ability to navigate high-stakes interactions, maintain discretion, and project authenticity played a crucial role in how she entered the royal scene. By the time Meghan's relationship with Prince Harry began, she had already mastered the subtle art of social navigation. She understood influence, optics, and the power of relationships in ways that positioned her not just as a charming outsider, but as someone capable of entering one of the world's most scrutinized institutions and making a lasting impression. Ferguson's perspective underscores that Meghan's trajectory was neither accidental nor purely opportunistic. It was the result of awareness, strategy, and a keen understanding of social dynamics. And yet, beneath the polished surface of Meghan's entry into royal-adjacent circles, there were layers of tension, secrecy, and hidden dynamics that few could see. These moments, fleeting encounters, private conversations, and subtle signals, would later become central to the story Ferguson confirmed. They are the invisible threads connecting Meghan's early social maneuvering to the alleged private connection with Andrew. Each interaction, each glance, and each whispered conversation carried potential implications that could ripple far beyond the immediate moment, and Ferguson's insight allows us to see the contours of these dynamics. So, as we reflect on Meghan's early entry into elite and royal-adjacent circles, consider this. Her story is not simply one of luck, chance, or external validation. It is a story of awareness, strategy, and skillful navigation of complex social networks. It is the backdrop against which one of the most sensational revelations in recent royal history, her alleged connection with Prince Andrew, would later emerge. And it is this foundation that allows us to understand the subtle, hidden forces at play, forces that Ferguson observed, recorded, and ultimately confirmed. What if the scandal that shook the royal world had been quietly brewing long before Meghan Markle became the Duchess of Sussex? What if behind the polished public appearances, the charity galas, and the media interviews, there existed a secret connection that no one outside a very small circle could have imagined? According to Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, such a connection did exist, a private entanglement between Prince Andrew and Meghan Markle before her marriage to Prince Harry. It's a revelation that shocks not only because of who was involved, but because of the implications it carries for the royal family, the media, and the public perception of Meghan herself. Let's pause and ask the question, how could such a connection remain hidden in a world dominated by paparazzi, social media, and obsessive public scrutiny? The answer lies in the subtlety of the interactions, the discretion exercised by those involved, and the intricate social choreography that defined their private encounters. This wasn't a careless fling exposed on Instagram. It was a series of carefully navigated interactions, shielded from public view by timing, discretion, and elite social understanding. Ferguson's insight allows us to piece together a narrative that was, until now, invisible to the outside world. The alleged affair began in spaces that most people would never associate with scandal. Private events, intimate dinners, and charitable functions provided the backdrop for the encounters. Meghan, already adept at navigating elite social circles, understood the importance of discretion. She moved with awareness, projecting charm and confidence while maintaining control over the narrative of her interactions. Andrew, a prince accustomed to scrutiny and the necessity of careful public presentation, similarly operated with subtlety, ensuring that their encounters remained shielded from gossip and media attention. Ferguson describes these early interactions as nuanced, almost imperceptible to outsiders. A glance here, a brief conversation there, moments that seemed ordinary to the casual observer carried weight within the inner circle. These exchanges created a private familiarity, a connection that was never meant to be public but was deeply consequential. From Ferguson's perspective, the precision with which Meghan and Andrew navigated these interactions was striking. It required social intelligence, awareness of power dynamics, and an understanding of the delicate balance between visibility and secrecy. But why did this connection matter? The stakes were higher than personal attraction. The royal family operates on optics, tradition, and reputation. Every action carries potential consequences for public perception and the institution itself. A private connection between Meghan and Andrew, if revealed prematurely, could have ignited scandal, strained family relationships, and jeopardized Meghan's later path within the royal family. Ferguson's confirmation suggests that those involved were acutely aware of these stakes and acted accordingly, carefully managing encounters to minimize risk while maintaining a personal bond. The timing of these encounters is also noteworthy. They occurred during a period when Meghan was building her social presence in elite circles, while Andrew was navigating personal and public challenges. Ferguson emphasizes that this overlap was not accidental. The proximity allowed for interactions that, though subtle, had the potential to be deeply influential. These moments were not merely social niceties. They were private exchanges with consequences that extended beyond the immediate setting, shaping perceptions, trust, and alliances within the royal network. What makes the alleged affair particularly compelling is the interplay between public and private personas. Meghan's public image was carefully curated, charitable, poised, and professional, while her private interactions demonstrated awareness, assertiveness, and strategic maneuvering. Similarly, Andrew's public duties and appearances masked the nuances of his private behavior. Ferguson's observations highlight how these dual realities intersected, creating opportunities for a connection that, while invisible to outsiders, was highly significant behind closed doors. Ferguson also notes the psychological dimensions of these interactions. Maintaining secrecy in high-stakes environments requires constant awareness, discretion, and emotional regulation. Meghan's ability to navigate these dynamics speaks to her social intelligence and adaptability. Andrew's awareness of optics and risk management similarly shaped how encounters unfolded. Together, their interactions created a delicate balance, a private connection shielded from public scrutiny, yet charged with emotional and strategic significance. But the alleged affair was not just about individual behavior. It was about the ripple effects on relationships, perceptions, and future events. Each private interaction had potential implications for Harry, for the palace, and for the broader media narrative. Ferguson suggests that even minor exchanges were noted by insiders, creating layers of awareness, speculation, and tension. The stakes were enormous, and the careful orchestration of encounters was necessary to prevent exposure and manage potential fallout. Consider the emotional stakes involved. For Meghan, maintaining discretion while navigating elite networks required constant vigilance. She was building a public image, developing relationships, and positioning herself strategically for her future. For Andrew, balancing private connection with public scrutiny added complexity, particularly given the intense media attention already surrounding his life. Ferguson emphasizes that these emotional pressures amplified the significance of each encounter, turning even ordinary interactions into high-stakes moments of tension, awareness, and subtle negotiation. And then there were the whispers. Ferguson recounts that within the inner circles, murmurs of the connection began to circulate quietly. Observations by those who noticed subtle cues, private exchanges, or unusual attention. These whispers were contained, not because they were unimportant, but because those involved understood the consequences of exposure. The royal environment operates on discretion, and the culture of containment ensured that private connections remained private, even in the face of speculation. Yet, despite the careful orchestration, the connection was not entirely immune to observation. Ferguson hints that there were moments when others noticed unusual familiarity, private gestures, or repeated interactions. These moments, while never fully confirming the connection, created intrigue, speculation, and subtle tension within the palace. Insiders were aware that something was occurring beneath the surface, even if the full truth remained hidden. What adds to the drama is the timing relative to Meghan's later engagement to Prince Harry. The private connection with Andrew occurred before Meghan became romantically involved with Harry, meaning that these encounters predated one of the most scrutinized relationships in modern royal history. The implications are staggering. A private connection that could have influenced perceptions, trust, and alliances long before public scrutiny intensified. Ferguson's confirmation underscores how carefully managed these interactions were, and how significant they remained even as Meghan's public narrative began to evolve. The alleged affair, as Ferguson recounts it, is not sensationalized or exaggerated. It is a story of subtlety, strategy, and private connection. It is about the invisible currents that shape relationships within elite circles, the careful management of optics and perception, and the high-stakes navigation required to maintain discretion. Every glance, every private conversation, and every social interaction carried weight, and the consequences of exposure could have been immense. Finally, consider the broader context. The royal family operates within a world where private actions can have public repercussions, where secrets carry enormous weight, and where the balance between personal desire and institutional expectation is delicate and often precarious. Ferguson's perspective illuminates this context, showing how the alleged affair was not a simple personal misstep, but part of a complex web of relationships, strategy, and awareness that defines life behind palace walls. And yet, despite all the discretion, all the strategy, and all the careful management, secrets have a way of emerging. The connections that seemed safely hidden, the private exchanges that appeared inconsequential, all contributed to a narrative that would eventually surface. Ferguson's confirmation is the first public acknowledgement of this hidden layer, and it opens the door to understanding the far-reaching consequences of what happened behind closed doors. Imagine the moment the royal family first learned about the private connection between Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew. The palace is a world of tradition, protocol, and carefully curated public appearances. Every word spoken, every glance exchanged, and every decision made carries weight, not just for individual reputations, but for the image of the monarchy as a whole. Now imagine the shock, tension, and quiet panic that must have rippled through the halls when whispers of this hidden relationship began to surface. According to Sarah Ferguson, the news did not stay contained for long. The inner circle, accustomed to managing scandals behind closed doors, was suddenly faced with a revelation that challenged their assumptions, loyalties, and strategic calculations. The initial reaction, Ferguson explains, was one of disbelief. How could such a connection exist without prior detection? Prince Andrew, already navigating scrutiny from previous controversies, now had an added layer of concern. Meghan Markle, rising in prominence and influence, became suddenly more complex in the eyes of palace insiders. Family members who had long been adept at reading subtle social cues and controlling narratives were confronted with an unexpected dynamic, one that carried enormous potential for fallout. The palace operates on the assumption that all interactions are visible and manageable, but this revelation threatened to upend that delicate balance. Consider the emotional weight of this moment. Within the royal family, appearances are everything, and discretion is paramount. Each member understood that exposure could lead to scandal, intense media scrutiny, and even public mistrust. Ferguson describes the corridors of the palace during this period as charged with tension. Conversations were hushed, glances carried meaning, and every meeting was approached with a heightened sense of caution. Members of the family had to navigate not just the facts of the situation, but the implications for their own reputations and the institution they represented. The reactions varied depending on proximity and perspective. Some family members expressed concern for the potential public perception. They were aware that if such a connection became known externally, it could dominate headlines, dominate conversation, and dominate the global narrative about the monarchy. Others reacted with anger or frustration, recognizing that private matters, already complicated enough, were now layered with risk, secrecy, and potential betrayal. Ferguson notes that even those not directly involved found themselves drawn into the web of speculation, their behavior subtly influenced by the knowledge of what had occurred behind closed doors. One particularly intriguing element, according to Ferguson, was how the family managed the balance between personal relationships and institutional responsibility. Royals are not only individuals, they are symbols. Their actions are interpreted as reflections of the monarchy as a whole. The private connection between Meghan and Andrew, therefore, was not just a personal matter. It became a potential crisis of image, protocol, and trust. Family members had to assess the situation carefully. Was this something to contain quietly? Was it something to confront directly? And how would it affect the delicate network of alliances, loyalties, and relationships within the palace? Ferguson's insight also highlights the complexity of emotional responses. Royals are expected to maintain composure, but privately, feelings of shock, disappointment, and even betrayal were inevitable. For some, the revelation disrupted long-standing assumptions about Meghan, Andrew, and the dynamics within the family. For others, it reinforced suspicions or private speculations that had previously gone unspoken. The emotional undercurrents, according to Ferguson, were intense, charging conversations with tension, creating alliances, and reshaping perceptions of loyalty and trust. It wasn't just the senior members of the family who were affected. Staff, advisors, and those who worked closely with the royals also sensed the change in atmosphere. Ferguson notes that palace aides became hyper-aware of interactions, subtle behaviors, and even seating arrangements at private events. Every gesture was analyzed for potential significance. The ripple effect of the revelation extended beyond the family itself, reaching into the institutional machinery of the monarchy, the advisors, communications teams, and household staff who worked tirelessly to manage image and narrative. The strategic response, Ferguson explains, was immediate but discreet. The palace has long relied on internal containment strategies, controlling leaks, managing narratives, and ensuring that sensitive information does not escape beyond trusted circles. In this case, the family reportedly engaged in a combination of private discussions, reassurances, and monitoring of interactions. They needed to ensure that the connection remained contained, that reputations were protected, and that the eventual trajectory of Meghan's relationship with Prince Harry was not jeopardized prematurely. Yet, despite their best efforts, tension continued to build. Ferguson describes moments of awkwardness during family gatherings, subtle shifts in conversation topics, and unspoken awareness that certain relationships were now under scrutiny. Even those not directly involved felt the weight of this hidden truth, sensing that the palace's delicate social balance had been disrupted. It was as if the revelation had created invisible ripples, affecting not only those involved, but the entire ecosystem of trust, perception, and influence within the family. And then there was the question of timing. The palace operates on carefully orchestrated timelines, planning events, announcements, and appearances with precision. The revelation came at a particularly sensitive moment, when Meghan's engagement to Harry was gaining public attention. Managing the internal response while preparing for public appearances required exceptional tact. Ferguson notes that discussions within the family were cautious, measured, and often emotionally charged, reflecting both the personal impact of the revelation and the institutional stakes. The emotional complexity of the royal response cannot be overstated. Royals are trained to navigate public life, but private life presents its own challenges. Ferguson describes the mixture of loyalty, concern, frustration, and calculation that colored the family's approach. Each member had to reconcile personal feelings with institutional responsibilities, balancing empathy for those involved with the imperative to protect the monarchy's reputation. This delicate dance, Ferguson suggests, was exhausting, high stakes, and fraught with potential for missteps. Another element of the reaction, according to Ferguson, involved subtle power dynamics. Relationships within the palace are influenced not just by familial bonds, but by hierarchy, influence, and the unspoken rules that govern conduct. The revelation of the connection between Meghan and Andrew altered these dynamics, creating uncertainty about loyalty, trust, and the balance of influence. Decisions had to be made carefully, not just to contain potential scandal, but to maintain cohesion and authority within the family. And yet, despite careful management, the palace could not fully anticipate how the revelation would shape future events. Ferguson emphasizes that while the family attempted to contain the situation, the knowledge of what had occurred influenced decisions, relationships, and strategies in ways that were often invisible to outsiders. Every interaction, every decision, and every public appearance carried the weight of this hidden truth, subtly influencing behavior, and shaping outcomes in the months and years to come. Finally, Ferguson hints at the human element often lost in media coverage. Royals, like anyone else, are capable of fear, regret, confusion, and doubt. The revelation created moments of private reflection, tension, and recalibration. Family members had to navigate their own emotions while considering the broader implications for those involved and for the institution itself. These emotional undercurrents, combined with strategic considerations, created a complex, high-stakes environment that would shape the unfolding story. What happens when a private connection intersects with a burgeoning public relationship? In Meghan Markle's case, the answer would set the stage for one of the most scrutinized royal romances in history. Before the world knew her as the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan was already navigating elite networks, subtly interacting with Prince Andrew, and positioning herself strategically within circles that intersected with the royal family. Then came Prince Harry, charismatic, impulsive, and deeply human in ways that contrasted with the formal, rigid expectations of royal life. Their meeting was electric, but beneath the surface, unseen currents were already in motion, influenced by private knowledge, family dynamics, and the connections Meghan had cultivated before entering the palace. The ignition point of their relationship wasn't simply the famous blind date arranged by mutual friends. It was also informed by context that the public would never see, but that Ferguson's observations reveal. Meghan had already demonstrated her social intelligence, her ability to manage perception, and her understanding of high-stakes interactions. Harry, meanwhile, carried the weight of family legacy, public expectation, and personal trauma. When their paths crossed, it was not merely a meeting of two people. It was a collision of histories, expectations, and invisible undercurrents that had been building for years. Ferguson emphasizes that understanding this context is crucial. The alleged connection with Andrew did not exist in a vacuum. It shaped perceptions, informed behavior, and added layers of complexity to Meghan's early interactions with Harry. While the world would later focus on the romance itself, the fairy tale engagement, the global fascination, the whirlwind wedding, the internal dynamics were far more intricate. Meghan was entering a family and institution with its own hidden rules, unspoken alliances, and pre-existing tensions, and every action, word, and glance carried significance. So what made the relationship ignite? Part of it was the contrast. Meghan represented a different kind of presence than the royal world was accustomed to: modern, media-savvy, assertive, and socially intelligent. Harry, often portrayed as rebellious and emotionally expressive, found in her someone who could navigate the pressures of public life while matching him in awareness, wit, and presence. Ferguson notes that this mutual recognition created a spark that was both personal and strategic. Two individuals aware of the stakes, aware of the scrutiny, and aware of the potential for their relationship to become larger than life. But here's the key tension. As their relationship grew, so did the potential collision of past and present. Meghan's private interactions with Andrew, though discreet, now existed as a backdrop, an invisible thread that intersected with her public romance with Harry. Ferguson's confirmation suggests that this thread influenced behavior, conversations, and even decisions within the palace. Royals are intensely aware of optics, and while Harry may have been swept up in personal emotion, the palace's internal radar was attuned to subtleties that the public could never see. Ferguson highlights specific dynamics that shaped the early stages of their relationship. For instance, Meghan's ability to manage media attention, cultivate relationships, and maintain a balance between private authenticity and public persona created both admiration and unease. Harry, meanwhile, was navigating his own identity within the royal framework, aware of family expectations, public scrutiny, and personal desire. The intersection of these factors created a high-stakes environment in which romance, strategy, and hidden knowledge converged. Consider also the influence of Andrew's connection. While Meghan and Harry were building trust, intimacy, and partnership, unseen elements from her prior private interactions existed in the background. Ferguson describes this as a subtle tension, a dynamic where past connections had potential consequences for the emerging public relationship. It was invisible to outsiders, yet profoundly influential for those operating within the royal system. The interplay between private history and public romance added layers of suspense, uncertainty, and strategic calculation that few could have anticipated. The emotional intensity of this period cannot be overstated. For Meghan, the relationship with Harry represented both opportunity and risk. It was a chance to align with someone who understood her, respected her, and could share in the pressures of public life. At the same time, the hidden context of previous interactions, particularly with Andrew, added complexity and potential vulnerability. Ferguson notes that the emotional stakes were heightened not just by love, but by awareness, strategy, and the anticipation of how past relationships might intersect with the future. For Harry, the situation was equally complex. He was entering a relationship that would transform his life, his role, and his public image. Ferguson emphasizes that he was aware, at some level, of the intricate social landscape into which Meghan was stepping, yet the full scope. The subtle history, hidden connections, and private dynamics was not fully visible, creating potential blind spots and emotional tension. This combination of excitement, trust, and uncertainty created a volatile mix, setting the stage for both romance and conflict. Ferguson also notes the role of external observers. Advisors, palace staff, and even media channels were monitoring early signs of the relationship. While the public narrative would later focus on fairy tale elements, insiders were acutely aware of context, potential risks, and subtle behavioral signals. The early days of the romance were not merely personal. They were high-stakes navigation within an institution that rewards discretion, awareness, and strategic alignment. Humor, charm, and personal connection played a critical role in sustaining the ignition point. Ferguson recalls that despite the weight of external pressures, Meghan and Harry found moments of genuine connection, laughter, and intimacy. These moments, though private, were essential in building trust and alignment. They also contrasted sharply with the pressures of public life, creating a tension between personal fulfillment and institutional expectation, a tension that would define much of their journey together. And then there was the inevitability of exposure. Ferguson notes that in the palace, no private interaction remains hidden forever. The awareness of others, subtle observations, and the flow of information create an environment where secrets can only be maintained for so long. The ignition point of Harry and Meghan's relationship was thus not simply a matter of personal connection. It was the beginning of a high-stakes dance, where private joy, hidden context, and public scrutiny intersected in ways that would dramatically shape the unfolding story. The result of this ignition point was both thrilling and precarious. A romance had begun, filled with promise, passion, and connection, but it was also embedded within a landscape of secrecy, prior relationships, and institutional oversight. Every step forward carried potential consequences, and every decision required careful negotiation between heart and strategy. Ferguson's insight highlights how this dynamic was deeply influential, shaping the trajectory of Meghan's path, Harry's emotional journey, and the royal family's internal management of emerging revelations. And just when it seemed the romance could proceed along familiar fairy tale lines, a hidden thread from the past, the private connection with Andrew, loomed quietly in the background. This thread was subtle, invisible to most, yet powerful in its potential to disrupt, influence, and complicate what seemed like a straightforward path. The stage was set for tension, confrontation, and unexpected revelations that would test trust, loyalty, and family bonds in ways no one anticipated. In any institution where power, legacy, and public perception intersect, secrets are rarely truly secret. The royal family, with its centuries of history, traditions, and scrutiny, is no exception. Gossip, rumors, and insider leaks have long been the hidden currency of palace life, shaping perceptions, influencing decisions, and occasionally sparking scandal. But when Sarah Ferguson confirmed the private connection between Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew, it became clear that the machinery of palace gossip had been quietly at work long before the public ever heard a word. Let's begin with the question: how do secrets survive in a world where palace aides, advisors, and family members are constantly observing, recording, and evaluating behavior? Ferguson points out that this world is a delicate ecosystem of loyalty, discretion, and rivalry. Every staff member, from senior advisors to household assistants, is acutely aware that even the smallest observation could carry enormous consequences. Yet human nature being what it is, whispers find their way into corners, observations become speculation, and private matters slowly gain life outside their intended confines. Insider leaks regarding Meghan and Andrew began subtly, Ferguson recalls. It was rarely anything overt. No formal complaints, no official reports, just murmurs, sidelong glances, and stories that seemed too carefully crafted to be mere coincidence. These hints would circulate at private dinners, among trusted aides, and within elite social circles that had long-standing connections to the monarchy. While the palace outwardly maintained composure, internally the whispers generated tension, uncertainty, and subtle realignments of trust and attention. One of the most fascinating aspects, according to Ferguson, is the way gossip operates as both a tool and a weapon within the palace. On the one hand, it can alert senior members to potential issues, acting as an informal intelligence system. On the other hand, it can sow discord, create jealousy, and subtly undermine reputations. In the case of Meghan and Andrew, insider knowledge was a double-edged sword. Those who were aware of the private connection had to navigate the ethical and political implications of what they knew, deciding whether to remain silent, relay the information selectively, or attempt to influence outcomes discreetly. Gossip thrives on curiosity, Ferguson emphasizes, and the royal world provides endless fodder. Every gesture, every conversation, every event is scrutinized for meaning. In this context, Meghan's rise in prominence, her charm, and her ability to navigate complex social interactions created fertile ground for speculation. Her interactions with Andrew, though subtle and private, were noticed by those who were attuned to the nuances of palace life. These observations, once shared, quickly became part of the invisible narrative that shaped perception and expectation. The palace culture itself amplifies gossip. Ferguson explains that there is a deeply ingrained tension between loyalty and information sharing. Staff and family members are constantly balancing the need for discretion with the desire to inform, protect, or influence. In some cases, leaks occur unintentionally, a casual comment overheard, a subtle gesture misinterpreted, a private conversation repeated with slight embellishment. In others, they are deliberate, intended to shift attention, test reactions, or manipulate outcomes. Meghan and Andrew's alleged connection became a focal point for both types of leaks. Consider the emotional dimension. For those involved in the palace, gossip is rarely trivial. It carries consequences, influences relationships, and shapes decisions. Ferguson recounts that the reactions among staff ranged from fascination to anxiety, with some viewing the information as a potential crisis and others as an opportunity to influence outcomes. The tension created by insider leaks added a layer of psychological pressure to an already complex environment, affecting not only the principal figures but also the broader network of advisors and household staff. Media speculation, Ferguson notes, further complicates the ecosystem. Although the palace has historically maintained strict control over information, leaks often find their way into media channels, whether directly or indirectly. Once public attention intensifies, the palace must navigate not only internal reactions, but also the perception of millions around the world. In Meghan and Andrew's case, the interplay between private gossip, selective leaks, and eventual media scrutiny created a feedback loop that magnified tension, risk, and uncertainty. Ferguson also highlights the strategic use of gossip. Royals and their advisors are adept at leveraging information subtly. A well-timed whisper, a carefully placed observation, or a discreet conversation can influence perceptions without creating overt conflict. In the context of Meghan and Andrew, insider knowledge was wielded both consciously and unconsciously, shaping how family members approached interactions, monitored behavior, and made decisions regarding the emerging relationship between Meghan and Harry. Yet gossip is unpredictable. Ferguson emphasizes that while insiders attempt to manage narratives, rumors often take on lives of their own. Observations that seem minor can become exaggerated, repeated, and interpreted in ways never intended by those who first noticed them. The palace, in trying to contain information, sometimes inadvertently fuels speculation. This dynamic creates a volatile environment, where even carefully guarded secrets are vulnerable to distortion, exposure, and dramatic consequences. One particularly tense moment, Ferguson recalls, involved subtle signals exchanged during private gatherings. Certain gestures, exchanges of attention, or patterns of interaction hinted at knowledge that insiders were only beginning to connect. Staff and family members who were alert noticed these patterns, quietly discussing implications while maintaining outward composure. Ferguson notes that such moments are characteristic of palace life. Tension builds in the shadows, often unnoticed by the public, but deeply consequential for those navigating the inner circle. The ripple effects extend beyond perception. Gossip, even in its most subtle form, influences decisions. Staff might adjust seating arrangements, timing of events, or the flow of information based on what they believe they know. Family members might alter private conversations or public messaging in response to rumors. In the case of Meghan and Andrew, insider awareness subtly shaped interactions, creating an environment in which every move, every word, and every glance carried potential significance. But here's the twist. Insider leaks were only part of the story. Ferguson reveals that some whispers, though carefully managed, reached individuals outside the palace in ways that would later become pivotal. These external connections, friends, confidants, and social acquaintances, acted as unintentional conduits for information, creating an invisible web that linked private knowledge with the wider world. The palace's traditional mechanisms of discretion were being tested by the reach of social networks and the permeability of elite circles. The emotional stakes cannot be overstated. Those managing, observing, or relaying gossip experienced heightened tension, uncertainty, and responsibility. Ferguson emphasizes that even casual observations carried weight, as they could alter perceptions, influence behavior, or precipitate confrontation. The psychological intensity of this environment adds depth to the story of Meghan and Andrew, demonstrating how private connections are never truly isolated in an institution built on visibility, legacy, and reputation. Ultimately, insider leaks and palace gossip created a pressure cooker. Subtle knowledge, observation, and speculation coexisted with formal protocols, public appearances, and private discretion. Meghan and Andrew's connection was no longer merely a private matter. It had become a dynamic influencing behavior, shaping perceptions, and quietly preparing the stage for future revelations. Ferguson's account underscores that palace life is not only about appearances. It is also about the hidden currents that ripple through relationships, power structures, and strategic calculations. And just when it seemed the palace had reached a point of equilibrium, a leak emerged that threatened to expose everything. A carefully contained whisper began to spread, testing loyalty, discretion, and the very fabric of internal trust. Imagine waking up one morning to find that private whispers, carefully contained within palace walls, have erupted into a global media frenzy. What was once subtle, nuanced, and hidden is now splashed across headlines, social media platforms, and broadcast news channels. For Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew, the moment the media storm hit was more than inconvenient. It was transformational, catastrophic, and irreversible. According to Sarah Ferguson, this was a turning point when private connections, insider knowledge, and palace gossip collided with the relentless machinery of modern media. The first question that arises is how such a private matter could become public. Ferguson notes that the royal family operates in an ecosystem where discretion is paramount, yet the sheer intensity of scrutiny makes secrets fragile. Journalists, eager for exclusives, are constantly monitoring royal appearances, social events, and even minor deviations from protocol. In this environment, even a minor observation, once amplified by rumor, can cascade into a global story. That is exactly what happened in the case of Meghan and Andrew. The initial leaks were subtle, Ferguson explains. A glance here, an unexplained dinner there, a hushed conversation overheard in a social setting. These fragments, once connected by the media, became the seeds of speculation. Soon, reporters pieced together narratives that, while incomplete, were compelling enough to capture global attention. The combination of celebrity, royalty, and scandal created irresistible fodder. Headlines framed the story as explosive, sensational, and shocking. Public curiosity surged. Social media amplified every rumor, turning speculation into a viral phenomenon within hours. Ferguson emphasizes the emotional toll on those at the center. Meghan, already navigating a whirlwind romance with Prince Harry, now faced an unprecedented level of scrutiny. Andrew, whose past controversies had already attracted intense media attention, was thrust back into the spotlight. The palace, accustomed to managing crises, had to operate at full capacity, monitoring the narrative, controlling information, and attempting damage control, while dealing with a situation that was increasingly beyond their control. Consider the psychological intensity. Being at the center of a media storm is exhausting, disorienting, and emotionally charged. Every statement, every gesture, and every public appearance is dissected, analyzed, and interpreted. Ferguson recalls that both Meghan and Andrew experienced heightened stress, anxiety, and pressure, knowing that even minor missteps could be magnified into global controversy. The palace staff, advisors, and family members were equally vigilant, operating under the weight of potential reputational damage that could resonate worldwide. The media storm also exposed the complex interplay between truth, perception, and narrative. Ferguson notes that early reports were often speculative, drawing on incomplete information, insider hints, and social context. Yet in the fast-paced world of modern journalism, speculation becomes reality for the public. The lines between fact, interpretation, and rumor blurred, creating a potent cocktail of sensationalism, curiosity, and outrage. Every detail, real or imagined, was amplified, intensifying the scrutiny faced by those involved. Public reaction was immediate and polarized. Social media users debated endlessly, news outlets churned out analyses, and commentators speculated on the implications. Ferguson describes how this polarization added another layer of pressure. Supporters of Meghan defended her fiercely, highlighting her charisma, intelligence, and accomplishments. Critics questioned motives, intentions, and the timing of interactions with Andrew. For Andrew, the storm revived old controversies, while amplifying new questions about judgment, discretion, and propriety. The palace found itself in a high-stakes balancing act, attempting to manage perception while mitigating internal tension. The timing of the media storm was particularly consequential. It coincided with the early stages of Harry and Meghan's public relationship, magnifying tension and complexity. Ferguson notes that advisors worried that the revelations could influence public opinion, strain family relationships, and destabilize Meghan's emerging role within the royal family. Every public engagement became a calculated performance, every statement scrutinized for implications, and every interaction analyzed for hidden meaning. The media storm transformed private history into a public crisis overnight. One of the most striking aspects of the coverage, Ferguson observes, was the relentless focus on narrative and emotion. Journalists and commentators framed the story not just as a connection between two individuals, but as a drama of loyalty, ambition, and secrecy. Headlines emphasized shock, betrayal, and intrigue. Social media amplified outrage, fascination, and speculation. The emotional intensity of coverage mirrored the tension within the palace, creating a feedback loop in which media attention fueled private stress, which in turn generated further leaks, observations, and narratives. Ferguson also emphasizes the global dimension. Unlike